Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to the 268 people who are on this Zoom with us today. We've just started recording. And welcome to the New Hampshire Democratic Party Chair Forum with Emma Soldati and Ray Buckley. We're really excited to have the candidates with us today, and we're excited to talk about the issues that are so important to this state and this country. My name is Isaac Grimm. I'm the organizing director with Rights and Democracy New Hampshire. I really appreciate y'all being here with us. And if we could all start on a serious note, I wanted us to hold a moment of silence for the 58 people so far who have been lost from the storm in Texas and the complete failed response to protect people there. So if we could just hold a moment of silence and hold those folks in our hearts. We're going to take about 30 seconds of silence. Thank you all. For those who are just coming in from the waiting room, we've had about a dozen people come in. Welcome everyone who just came in from the waiting room. We still have more. We have a lot of folks on here. I think we might get up to almost our threshold of 300 here. Okay. All right, we got everyone in from the waiting room. Welcome everyone. If you just came in, please introduce yourself in the chat. Your name, your town, if you want to share your pronoun and why you're excited to be here today. And any of my other co-hosts, if you see people coming in, please feel free to just let them in the waiting room because otherwise I might miss folks and don't want people waiting around too long. So again, I'm Isaac Grimm, Rights and Democracy Organizing Director. Our organization was founded in 2015 on the belief that people-powered movements change history. And we know we're in a critical moment in history right now where political organizing has to shape our future if we want a really just and sustainable world for ourselves, for our children, and for future generations. So in our two-party system, pushing for progressive change, this is critical. We need parties that are accountable to the needs and demands of the 99% over the interests of corporations, short-term profits, and the super wealthy, right? This is a challenging thing, but it's necessary for us to do it. And we're excited to have this forum as a way for those who maybe know a little bit less about how the party functions or about the role of the chair of the party to be able to learn more, to learn about Ray, who is the incumbent party chair, to learn about Emmett, who is running for the seat, to learn about how that functions and to have input in the process of what we believe the party should be doing to build a stronger progressive movement and to build a more just, equitable, and sustainable New Hampshire. So I'm very excited to have Steve Marchand helping us moderate this forum today. We have some amazing rights and democracy leaders who will be asking questions. And we hope that y'all find this forum to be interesting, to be, posing questions that might not otherwise be asked. And if please, again, for those who came in just recently from the waiting room, please do feel free to share your reactions, your thoughts, and your questions in the chat, but keep it respectful. We are not here to be attacking. We're not here to have anyone be posting anything inappropriate in the chat. And if we see that happen, we'll be monitoring it. And, if people are getting out of line, we will have to control that. So let's keep this respectful and just thank you again for being here. Really, really incredible turnout. We're almost at 300 people right now. So with that, I will pass it over to my colleague, Steve Marchand, we are so grateful to have with us to introduce himself and to talk about the format and the rules for this forum.
Okay, Isaac and everybody, can you hear me okay right now?
Yep.
Great. All right, thank you. Thank you all for being here on a Saturday morning. Thanks to Ray and Emmett for participating in this. It's obviously a very important part of the party's future and the state's future and all of our future. And it's an honor to be able to be a small part of the event today. The format will be pretty straightforward. Basically, Ray will be here for the first half hour. There'll be a brief break in between, and then Emmett will have a similar format and a separate half hour following that break. I'll be moderating. That includes timekeeping. And I will be asking questions with the ability for follow-up as is appropriate. And then we'll have a number of some of our most active members and volunteers with RAD, members of the progressive community around the state, who will also be asking questions. And as time permits, again, I'll be providing some follow-up if perhaps the candidates didn't answer the question. It is politics, so that is a possibility, I must admit. With all that said, why don't we get right into it? We're really fortunate to have Ray and Emmett here today. Ray will be our first of the two. And I want to begin with Ray with a question that basically broadens it out to start this off. You have been the party chair for 14 years now, and obviously Emmett is challenging you in that position. So in effect, the members of the state committee, Ray, you're asking them to rehire you for another 2-year stint as chair. And obviously there's a lot of questions people will have about some of the successes and perhaps some of the recent failures from 2020. So in the next couple of minutes, answer the question folks have. Why should, after 14 years of being the party chair, why should folks rehire you for another 2-year stint as the NHDP chair?
Well, thank you, Steve. It's unbelievably exciting to see well over 300 people here for this forum. It is often that when I travel to local committees or county committees, that there's only half a dozen or a dozen folks. And to have this renewed interest in the party, I think is fantastic because it's important that whether you've been around for a long time or you're relatively new to New Hampshire or the party, that you understand where we've been and where we're headed. The reason I'm seeking an additional term is that I am absolutely committed to making New Hampshire a blue state. In each election cycle, we make a step forward. Every single election cycle, we've made history. We've broken some record that we've never done before. We're headed in the right direction. Our support for the grassroots is unmatched in the nation. The building of the grassroots is what saved so much of our election because of the phenomenal people that are on the ground, that are building their support within the communities. And if you look at our growth, you'll see just in the last 10 years, New Hampshire Democrats have won 2 out of 3 elections. That's phenomenal when you're living in a Republican-leaning purple state. I think that the advances that we've had are fantastic, and the direction that we're headed is, I think, a very positive for New Hampshire. We are almost there. The increases in the average size of the New Hampshire House, the Senate, and the Council each decade is a giant leap forward. Are there things that we need to do to improve? Of course. We do that after every election, and especially after this election that so many of us were heartbroken over. We established the task force. And that included people listening to over 1,000 people that want to express their thoughts and ideas, and we all await that task force report. In the meantime, I've got a number of things that I'm going to be moving forward on, waiting to hear what the task force is. But I think there's some important things that I'm sure we'll talk about that. But fundamentally, it is important to understand that the party's resources, where the party is today versus where it was before. And you can talk to any former state party chair. The amount of money that we raise, the staff that we have, and the support that we give to our candidates, our local and county committees is unprecedented. It is not clear. When I was executive director back in the early 90s, I was the singular staff person most of the time. And sometimes I had one other person. Now we have a permanent staff of 9, and the thousands of emails and calls that come in every month is phenomenal. And that's because we have developed a real sense of commitment and support for our local candidates, and we've had great success with that as well. So I think we're headed in the right direction. We had a disappointment. We thought we could make history in 2020 by having the second back-to-back majorities, and the second time that we had won our majorities and still elected a Republican governor. We came close, but we didn't have it. But I think that in future, we've learned some lessons already, and that we'll be able to do it in the future. Thank you.
Okay, I apologize. I don't know if this will help at all in terms of the lag in my audio. And hopefully everybody heard Ray as well. Ray, a follow-up more specific to the recent couple of elections we've had. One of the most common questions I've heard from activists deals with Governor Sununu. And in a year, in 2016, where he was the only Republican candidate for governor in the country who was able to win in a state that Clinton won, and then enjoying similar success in 2018 and 2020, separate from the specific question of why we have not succeeded in putting a serious dent in Governor Sununu, what can we learn from this sort of Teflon appearance that he has politically? What can we learn for 2022, whether he runs for governor or U.S. Senate or whatever, that can help us both in dealing with Governor Sununu politically, as well as maybe things that we can learn about what he has done successfully that we might be able to frankly replicate, if not his policies, at least some of his political strengths that he appears to have, because he does seem like a unique political figure in some ways nationally. What can we learn from that?
Well, let's look back to 2016. Every public poll, and even our private polls, showed Colin Van Oosten winning by a sizable margin, more than 5%. The closeness of the U.S. Senate race, where we defeated Kelly Ayotte by 1,017, and the closeness is the closest race for a swing state for Hillary Clinton. There were about 30,000 or so voters that were electrified by Facebook or some communication. And you saw that a lot of the other swing states fell, but New Hampshire held on. Our sister states of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan. We were able to do that because of the grassroots networks that we have here. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough for Colin. In 2018, the polling showed just a week and a half ahead of time that Molly Kelly had brought the race to a tie. The RGA came in with an unprecedented amount of millions of dollars to support Chris Sununu. That just never happened in history before, where either the DGA or RGA came in for an incumbent governor. So they came in and spent millions of dollars on attack ads. And unfortunately, we were unable to get, the DGA had already promised the resources to Florida and to a number of other states, and they didn't have the resources to give. I think everyone knows about my very public dissatisfaction with the DGA over that. And so we wanted to make sure that we were prepared this time. So not only had we secured the agreement of the DGA to support our nominee, which came in with about 1.1 or $1.2 million this cycle, but we also raised extra money to set aside that we could be able to come in and be supportive of our candidate. So if the polls showed that the race was tied, that we were going to be able to have the resources to push over the top. Unfortunately, all of that got thrown out the window with COVID. What happened with COVID is that, frankly, Donald Trump scared the death out of the people of New Hampshire, but they also didn't trust that Trump wasn't going to steal the election again. And so it held them in supporting our congressional delegation because they wanted to make sure that there was a possibility of him being held in check. On the state level, Chris Sununu benefited like every other incumbent governor in the country. All of them benefited because of, in comparison to Trump, they looked responsible. And there was simply nothing that was going to do to convince them that he was not, even though we truly believe that he was not, for their own sake. The fear that they had was very real, and they needed to believe that somebody out there in government was being protected. And we saw that in the primary when 4,000 Democrats wrote Sununu's name in. We tried very hard to make sure that our nominee was successful, but like every other incumbent governor that was running for re-election, Sununu got re-elected, whether they were from a red state or a blue state, or they were a Democrat or a Republican. We did not anticipate COVID. If COVID had not occurred, do I believe that we could have defeated Chris Sununu? Yes. That changed not only how we campaigned, but it also changed the dynamics of the voters' mind on how they looked at the race and the election. I do not believe that Chris Sununu can be elected to the U.S. Senate if he chooses to run against Maggie Hassan. I also do not believe that he's going to run for a fourth term. I think that we're going to have an open governor's seat. And I think that Sununu is very beatable. He no longer has the window, hiding behind Donald Trump. Trump is not dominating the every aspect of our lives anymore. And I think that's a big difference, that Sununu is going to be held in. And that's why I am more optimistic than a lot of people about the gerrymandering. If they tried to do some outrageous gerrymandering, Sununu will be held accountable because he has to sign it. And I don't think that if he plans on running for anything ever again, that he's going to want to be held accountable for something like that. The union leaders already warned the Republicans about that. So I think that Chris Sununu is defeatable.
All right. Thank you, Ray. We have a number of folks, including some of our best and brightest in the RAD community, that are asking, will be asking questions now for much of the balance of this portion of the program. Our next person is Dana Hackett. Dana is a Laconia resident. She's the co-founder of the Lakes Region Rights and Democracy Chapter, and we're really pleased to have her as part of today's program. So, Dana, you have a question.
Steve, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's here. This is a really exciting event. My name is Dana Hackett. I grew up in Jackson, New Hampshire and Carroll County. I've lived in the Lakes region for about 6 years now. I've been inspired to become more active in local and national politics to try to change the direction of the future for myself, my daughter, and all marginalized groups. I'm working to promote policy and leadership change to support progressive values. And my question to Mr. Buckley is, the Democratic Party has a branding issue here and around the country in rural communities. In New Hampshire, we've been stuck for years in a perpetual back and forth swing between Republicans and Democrats being in power, and over the past 10 years, several important small town and rural communities have trended red. Why have so many people in the rural working class turned away from the Democratic Party? And what strategy do you propose for reversing the trend towards the right wing in rural New Hampshire? Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, the swinging back and forth is more of a recent phenomenon. I served 18 years in the House and never even imagined having the majority. Out of the last 8 elections, we've won the majority in the House 4 times. I think that's a phenomenal record, and I think that we're headed in the direction of having a permanent majority. But thank you for your work, and thank you for your involvement. I think that's critically important, that everyone be involved, whether they're involved within the party or with any of the organizations like Kent Street or RAD or some of the others that are across the state. It all is part of the same effort, and it all makes a difference. The struggle of the rural communities is something that's a national challenge that nationally we have been discussing for a number of years. One of the things that we've discovered here in New Hampshire, that the real only way to break through Fox News, the Facebook poison, the Twitter poison, and all the other ways that so many of these rural voters are being inundated with false information, is neighborhood conversations one-on-one. And we've been moving toward that. Unfortunately, last year, that became impossible. Volunteers and candidates did not want to go door to door. They didn't feel that it was a safe thing to do for themselves or for the voters. So I think we will get back to that relatively soon. But I think that having strong grassroots communities that where we're really talking directly to the voters, we showed that in election after election, that a strong local committee is the single most important thing to elect candidates to office. So I think that the trust factor between neighbors is a much higher than anything that they see on TV or read online.
Okay. Thank you, Ray. Our next question comes from the northern part of the state, from Sebastian Fuentes. He is a RAD Leadership Committee member from Thornton. Sebastian, great to have you as part of this today. You have a question for Chairman Buckley.
Good morning, everyone. Beautiful morning here in New Hampshire, in northern New Hampshire. Buenos dias for all my Spanish speaking here in the house. Mr. Buckley, the question for you. In 2016, Senator Maggie Hassan, when she was New Hampshire governor at the time, she called for halting all Syrian refugees from entering the US. And just recently, she voted wrong on not including undocumented immigrants in the coronavirus relief package. So these political decisions are indicative of a larger failing of the Democratic Party, opting for Republican light rather than fully and unapologetically rejecting the Republican Party's racist scapegoating and dog whistle politics. So public opinions polls show that the majority of Americans and the vast majority of the Democratic base in New Hampshire and all over the country is opposed to excluding immigrants, supporting universal health care, $15 minimum wage, and bold climate legislation. So Chairman Buckley, how have you moved the needle in your role with the New Hampshire Democratic Party on rejecting right-wing Republican framing and making the party live up to the desires of its base?
Well, I would encourage everyone to talk to their elected officials directly. That is the important thing that we have here in New Hampshire. We're very close to our elected officials. We have relatively physically a small state and population-wise as well, and they're open to one-on-one conversations. It is not for the party to direct elected officials, whether they're in the legislature or in Congress, on how to vote. Certainly, I can have private conversations one-on-one with some of our elected officials, but it's not something that is done out in the public. The role of the chair is to be supportive of our elected officials and our candidates and make sure that they're elected and their message gets out and that Republicans are held accountable. That said, I think that one of the ways that we have made things different is the fact that Jeanne Shaheen and Maggie Hassan's votes are the reason that Mitch McConnell is no longer majority leader. And you think about one thing after another. I'd been voting for 30 years before we even won one US Senate race. It wasn't until 2008, after I just gotten elected chair, when Jeanne Shaheen was elected to the Senate. We have won 4 of the 5 last US Senate races. If we hadn't won those races, Mitch McConnell, no matter what had happened in Georgia, would still be the majority leader and really controlling and trying to destroy everything that you're seeing the Biden-Harris administration accomplish. So whether it's talking with individual legislators and giving them advice, or talking to governor or members of our delegation, I think that it's important that we always are encouraging and pushing our elected officials, but the role of chair is to do that behind the scenes.
Okay, thank you, Ray and Sebastian. Our next question is from my good friend Laura Lynn. She is a resident of Temple, a climate and healthcare activist, RAD Leadership Committee member, and she was a candidate in the most recent election in 2020 for state representative in Hillsborough 25, and she put in a spirited effort there. Laura, part of this, can we get your question this morning for Chairman Buckley?
Unmute. Hi, everyone. It's Laura here from Temple. My question to Ray is, my greatest complaint as a candidate who ran for State House in a tough district last year, and that I heard from many progressives and local party activists since last year's election, is that there was drastic underinvestment in and support for local candidates from the party. While New Hampshire was far from the only state that this happened in, it's certainly true that while Biden beat Trump by tens of thousands more votes than Clinton did, and our federal candidates won their re-elections, Democrats faced devastating losses in the State House, State Senate, and Executive Council, which are all now dominated by the Republican Party. With hindsight, how would you have approached the 2020 elections differently? And what is your plan to win back the House, Senate, and Executive Council?
Thank you so much, Laura, for that question. I think that one of the things that we've certainly heard from the candidates, from the grassroots, and internally, is that we need to do a better job of coordinating with the committee to elect House Democrats. For those who are members of the state committee, you received a letter this morning that detailed $424,000 worth of expenses that the state party covered for the committee to elect House Democrats. But I'm not going to take credit for what Chet has done, because they actually have done a phenomenal job. Years before, the committee to elect House Democrats would struggle to raise $50,000. They raised well over $400,000 this year. And the fact that normally when a Republican governor is being reelected by a 2-to-1 margin, the average over the years, the House caucuses fell down to 103, 105, 110. We're only 13 short, 187. So there was a difference. That said, the party is going to communicate directly with the candidates in the future on things that we wanted to make sure that people knew. Last time we only spoke through the committee to elect House Democrats. I don't think anyone's to blame for that. That was the way it seemed to have been working, because it worked well in 2018 when we won the majorities. But it's clear that not everyone received the training information, not everyone received the sort of skills that we wanted to offer. So the resources that we provide are going to be increased. We are going to take 2018 as a model and return our majorities to the House, the Senate, and the majority. We learned a lot of lessons about who survived, who didn't survive this last election, and how we can improve those margins in those Republican leading districts.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura and Ray. I want to move to Ed Taylor now. Ed is the RAD board member in the Upper Valley with the Rise Upper Valley chapter. Ed, thanks for being part of this morning, and fire away with your question.
Thanks so much, Steve. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ed Taylor. I use he, him, his. Keeping New Hampshire primary has historically been a critical role for the party chair, but there is an inherent issue with New Hampshire, a 90% white state holding this position in a Democratic coalition whose center is increasingly people of color. Chairman Buckley, how do you circle that square?
Well, we enthusiastically endorsed the concept of including Nevada and South Carolina into the 4 early states. Historically, for many decades, it was just simply New Hampshire and Nevada. In 2006, the New Hampshire delegation to the DNC included South Carolina and Nevada in so that there's 4 early states where the primary in South Carolina has a substantial number of people of color, as does Nevada. And so we wanted to make sure that those voices were heard. We welcome that. Actually, we tried to push to have DC, which is 80% African-American, actually be part of the early states as well. We understand that. We're very pleased that our delegation is amazingly diverse. 1/3 of our elected delegates to the convention, the national convention, were part of either a person of color or LGBT or under the age of 40. That's I think a record that most other states would love to try to match. And our DNC delegation, I was able to have Joanne Dowdell who at that time was our secretary of the state party, an African-American volunteer for President Obama, appointed to the DNC, and she was reappointed 4 years later. And she is the very first African-American member of the DNC from New Hampshire. So I think it's very important that we always display an openness and a willingness to be involved and to empower people of color and all those who feel left behind. You know, I grew up gay here in New Hampshire. I thought seriously that I was the only gay person in the 1970s. I had no concept that there was any other gay person in the state. I lived in rural Canterbury, a mile in on a dirt road, and, you know, and I just thought that I was on my own. I don't want anyone to feel that they're on their own in New Hampshire. I know what that feels like. And so that's why we established the caucuses and why I want to make them a permanent part of the state party, where they actually have seats at the state committee and on the executive committee to increase that involvement. But my work on the national level on the DNC, my relationships with the various caucuses is significant. A lot of them supported me when I ran for DNC chair 4 years ago, and a lot of them are hounding me daily on how this race is going. They see me as a voice for diversity, a voice for making sure that everyone is feeling respected and included and lifted up. But what we do here in New Hampshire is that we offered these candidates the opportunity to answer direct questions. I've traveled to South Carolina, I've traveled to Nevada, helped them out in the last 4 cycles. But I've also traveled to every other state when I was president of the State Chairs Association. And I saw how voters interacted, or even leaders interacted with special guests. That's not how we treat them. New Hampshire voters are just as likely to say, that's very nice, nice to meet you, but what are you going to do about it? And we ask the tough questions. And I think we are uniquely suited for doing that because we've got this long-term history of doing that. I remember taking notes in 1975 as to who I was going to support for president when I was 15 years old. We take it seriously, and I think that as time goes by, that other states will build up that sort of support. But right now, I think it's uniquely New Hampshire.
Okay, thank you for that question and answer, Ray. I want to move on to Alana Person. She is a UNH grad. She is a RAD member, and we're really thrilled to have her participating this morning as well. So, Alana, I believe you have a question this morning for Chairman Buckley.
I do. Thank you so much, Chairman Buckley, for being here, and for everybody else for being here. I was born and raised in Laconia, and after I traveled with the international nonprofit Up With People for a year. So I did global leadership and volunteer work with 20 people from 20 different countries around the world, which was amazing. And then I interned in Annie Custer's office while in college in DC. So throughout my experiences, I've seen the importance of listening to people's stories and elevating underrepresented voices, which I'm trying to continue to do in New Hampshire. So my question going off of that is, how have you worked to make the party more inclusive to underrepresented groups, the BIPOC community, folks with disabilities, lower income folks, and younger people like me? And what is your plan to develop more young and diverse talent within the party's volunteer structure? Absolutely.
I could talk for hours on this, because that's what I really am committed to doing and so excited about. I just discussed about creating the caucuses that include the Disability Caucus, AAPI, the African American Caucus, Latino Caucus, and along with the Labor Caucus, town chairs, to really make sure that everyone has a voice. But let me first talk, and I think I pretty much covered about the outreach and empowerment that we're doing for many of the underrepresented groups. But let's talk about the young people. When I was in high school, I went to Belmont High School, just south of Laconia. I literally was the only high school student that was at any Democratic meeting or event. Now we have chapters across the state of high school Democrats. I am so excited, so proud of the work that they do. But we need to do better, and we need to do more. And I've pledged to increase our support for the high school Democrats, because that's really the ground level of where we're going to create our next level of leadership. Also going to work closer with the college Democrats. There's been some miscommunication that's happened, differences between the coordinating campaign and the state party. And so we're going to do some direct conversations with the chapters of the college Democrats. After all, it's their votes and their activity that has really made the difference in the last few years in the elections. They're a critical component to our ability to win office. And so they need to be respected, included more, and appreciated. Now, when it comes to the young Democrats, we have created a national model for young Democrats. I am ridiculously proud, and I think probably a lot of people nationally are so sick and tired of me bragging about the New Hampshire Young Dems. But for many decades, young Democrats organizations in New Hampshire and across the country were simply the volunteer group for the campaigns. And they were a passive organization. It's like, oh, you call them up, when you need a lit drop or you need phone calls. Well, what Lucas Meyer and his team did is they flipped it upside down and decided to be a proactive organization, which we have been enthusiastic supporters of. What they're doing is actually recruiting, training, and supporting people under the age of 40 for office. And literally there have been hundreds of people elected. We have a phenomenal, when I was in the legislature, I was 26, there was only 2 of us in the Democratic caucus under the age of 30. And I think there might've been half a dozen under the age of 40. Now there are over 30, I believe. So building that new generation, that next generation of leaders is very exciting. And having seen somebody like Chris Pappas from graduating school, being a local organizer in an election, running for the legislature, moving up to the executive council, and now being our first LGBT person representing us in Congress. Think about the history that makes and what the symbolism of what that does for every young person who is struggling. The fact that they're a member of Congress is openly gay. I think that is phenomenal. How we've brought women to a more than an equal level. Women are the majority in many instances. Our officers are mostly women. The state committee is populated with a sizable, if not majority, of women, and so we're very proud of that. But it is a never-ending challenge. It is not something where we're going to achieve X and that's it. You have to work at this nonstop, and you have to be open. And so it's whether it's the leadership of our state conventions, where always make sure that underrepresented people are the officers of the convention, or whether it's the platform committee, or any other of those activities. We try to encourage people coming from the underrepresented groups to take a leadership position so that they feel welcome and included, and that they are.
Yep.
Oh,
sorry. I'm gonna. Yeah, I in an effort to, and I apologize for any audio problems I have on my end. In an effort to try to squeeze in a quick question or two from the audience that we've tried to capture that Isaac has passed along. Let me try to quickly do that. I will do the same thing with Emmett on the back half of this. And on this, try to approach it more as a rapid fire round, solve the world's problems in 15 seconds or less kind of stuff, So let me, sorry in advance. I've been there. I have been there. And so let me go real quick.
Just real quick, just so I've seen that there's been a few questions in the chat I responded to, but just in case anyone wasn't seeing the chat, we budgeted this out for 30 minutes for each candidate. So those were our prepared questions, and then we wanted to be able to bring in audience questions, and then Emma will have his 30 minutes after that section. So just wanted to make sure everyone was clear on the format, and appreciate all the great chatter and questions and comments in the chat. Thanks, everybody.
And I am keeping track, and I will say, Ray, except for maybe that last question, generally they've been at or under the time, and I will be mindful to make it fair on both ends in terms of the cumulative time. So I appreciate everybody's patience and everybody's participation. Lisa DeMeo, love Lisa. Lisa is a member of our audience today. You have a quick question that hopefully can elicit a quick answer from Chairman Buckley. Lisa, go for it.
Hi, sorry about that. I didn't know I was speaking. So there has been a large push among the town chairs to make us voting members of the state committee. Do you support that? I fully understand that you do not have the ability to make that decision on your own. do you support town chairs receiving votes on the committee?
I think it's a worthy consideration. It is not a concept in my years that had been brought up before. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions that people are going to want to answer. I know that it took us nearly a decade to get the college Democrats on the state committee. And it took many years to allow Manchester and Nashua to separate from the Hillsborough towns as well. So it's not a very quick solution. It's something that they take very seriously. They look at all aspects, making sure that the diversity numbers are not negatively impacted, and a number of other issues I'm sure that they'll take impact. But the members of the state committee are electing the rules committee. Those go through the rules committee and they make their recommendation to the state committee and the state convention.
But do you support it?
Okay, sorry, Lisa.
I don't think I have enough information on the ramifications. I think it needs to be investigated and looked at on how that impacts the structure of the party and how it moves forward. I was one of the ones that prior to the effort that we made a few years ago, town chairs and town committees weren't automatic delegates to the state convention. So I have a record of making sure that the grassroots are feeling empowered. Prior to that, you had to either be the nominee for office or you had to run for one or two of the delegate slots. But we've worked to include the chair, the vice chair, the secretary treasurer as automatic delegates to our state convention, so that the local committees always have a voice in the state party when it comes to the state convention with resolutions, with our platform, and the other activities that we have at the convention.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Quick question, Terrence O'Rourke. Terrence, thank you for being with us today. You have a question, I think, that deals with attracting people across the aisle into our party without sacrificing core values. Did you want to ask that question to the chairman?
Oh, sorry, I didn't know. Yeah, so it's clear to me what's going on in New Hampshire is similar to what we saw in the South when it transitioned from Democratic to Republican. They were voting for Republican at the federal level, but still instinctively voting Democratic at the local level. So I think we have a lot of these, quote, legacy Republicans in New Hampshire who are obviously not comfortable with the national Republicans. They're voting for Joe Biden, for Chris Pappas, Annie Kuster, Jeanne Shaheen, but they're still voting Republican at the local level. But I think they're ideologically probably moderate or conservative Democrats. What is your plan to attract those Republicans and make them become Democrats, or at the very least, Democrat-leading independents without sacrificing our core values?
Well, first and foremost, we can't sacrifice our core values. All of us are involved in political life because of those values, whether it's the values of labor or women's reproductive rights or LGBTQ or the environment, diversity and justice for all those who have been underrepresented, or a number of other issues. Each person has their own reason why they're involved in the primary, and we cannot walk away from those values. And so let me start with that. But secondly, it's happening. If you look at where Democrats are winning in some of these towns, in even 2020 and 2018, it's far different than just a few decades ago. Now, Peterborough was a place where Democrats didn't even bother to run for many, many years. And now it's the flip. The Democrats are pretty much guaranteed to be elected in Peterborough. We swept all 3 seats in the town of Amherst, again, where it was nearly unheard of that Democrats had success. Sue Mullen was able to be elected and reelected in the town of Bedford. It wasn't too many years ago where you would start off any campaign where you would expect the Democratic nominee to lose Bedford by 5,000 votes. And we're now winning on the local level. I think that is a phenomenal change. So we are very much welcoming of them, but we are never going to step back from our values.
Steve, you there? All right, I'll step in real quick in case Steve's having an audio issue. So one other question, and if we could keep this brief, that would be great. That was brought forward by Melissa Bernardin about healthcare. Would love for Melissa to pose that question. Melissa, you with us?
Hi, everybody.
Hello, welcome.
Hi, good morning. I didn't know I had a chance to ask this question. So I don't have it in front of me, but I will do my best to remember. My question is related to healthcare in our country. As we know that under the current system of private for-profit insurance, there are still millions of Americans who do not have coverage. There are people who suffer health issues that are preventable because of denial of care. We have people who are losing their homes and going bankrupt because of medical bills. And then there's an incredible amount of stress and anxiety related to the ability to afford premiums, deductibles, co-pays, and so forth, as well as making sure that we're choosing doctors, facilities, and procedures that are in network according to our plans for those of us who do have coverage. Also, with the COVID state of emergency, or pandemic, I should say, we're also realizing that in many places in this country, and even though we're talking about New Hampshire, we need to take a national approach. When the person who carries the health insurance passes away, sometimes you completely lose your coverage. Knowing that a lot of Democratic supporters and progressives support a program called Improved Medicare for All, otherwise known as single payer, do you support efforts to move in this direction? And what would you do in your leadership role as chair of the New Hampshire Democratic Party to push the party platform in that direction of supporting that policy? Thank you for taking my question.
Thank you. You're absolutely correct. Healthcare reform is the real test of this generation. I was in the room when Ted Kennedy in 1978 said that healthcare is not a privilege, but it's a right. And I can remember cheering until I was hoarse. Because I absolutely believe that, coming from a poor to a low income family. I never had healthcare growing up. And I didn't even have healthcare all those years I worked for the party or worked for the campaigns because we never offered it. I'm very proud that not only do the state party employees and our campaign employees have full health care with no copay, that they've also unionized. And because it's labor that's really pushed this issue. And that's why we have to support organized labor so much, because on a personal level, my stepmother's a retired state employee association and has health care through that because of that. My father had a stroke and then broke his hip. The cost of both of those treatments would have been enough to break our entire family, not just them, but all of their children trying to put money in. It would have been absolutely devastating. We are very much of a lower income part of our family is still very much struggling, is what I'm saying. And so I absolutely believe that healthcare absolutely has to be there. Now, the state party chair doesn't have the privilege or ability to speak out on their own personal issues. I learned that very quickly when I was elected. So my personal opinions is I can have conversations one-on-one with elected officials. The platform committee, I have a hands-off approach. Cindy Warmington has chaired the platform committee for the last 10 years. And the members of the committee, after listening to a number of people craft our state party platform, and they do that without my engagement or my involvement. So personally, obviously, I very much support healthcare for all, and I would hope that we get there sooner than later. But publicly, I have to be supportive of what our elected officials, both at the legislature and in Washington, do. But I'm very proud of this fact, that if it wasn't for Jeanne Shaheen and Maggie Hassan being in the Senate, 30 million people would have been ripped out of their health care during the first year of the Trump administration. Think about that. It was the work of all of you who elected these two Democrats to the Senate, because it passed by one vote, that if either Jeanne Shaheen or Maggie Hassan were not in that Senate, 30 million Americans would have had zero health care.
Okay. Thank you, Ray. Thank you for those questions. That will complete our questions for Ray today. Ray, we appreciate your time. Isaac, I believe you are going to help us transition here to the Emmett portion of the program, and I'll let you take that for the moment to lead us in that direction.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And thank you again, Ray, for joining us, for taking those questions. I know there are a lot of great questions that folks were posting in the chat. We will be sure to save all of those questions, and Ray would love to bring those questions forward to you. And if you can directly respond to people later on, I'm sure folks would love to hear from you directly. So thank you again. All right. I was actually going to budget out about 5 minutes for us to stretch and take a little break, but I think folks are, we went a little long on that section. I think folks are anxious for us to move forward. So I'll just be very brief here. I want everyone, if you are able to, and if you feel comfortable to just stand up for a moment. It helps us actually retain information and to be able to be more functional if we can stop thinking for a moment and just move. So if everyone can just we're going to do this. This is kind of a silly thing, but we're going to do a thing called the social justice stretch. Okay. So I want everyone to, if you're down to do this with me, I'm going to put this in gallery so we can all be silly together and it's not just me. And if you want to be off video, that's totally fine too. But I want everyone to first start off. You're going to reach down and you're going to pull at the roots of the problems, right? If we're not grasping at the roots of the issues, then we are not actually dealing with the problem. So I want you to pull at the root causes of our injustices, right? And then I want everyone to stretch up and I want you to reach for that vision of a better world. All right, I want you to reach for it. You can also just use that as an excuse to stretch a little bit. All right. And then I want you to visualize the oppression and exploitation and problems you see, and I want you to punch at them. Okay, so you're gonna punch at the problems. All right. That's our little social justice stretch. I hope that got people to clear the cobwebs a little bit and for us to reset. And now we're going to take it over into Emmett Soldati's section. Very excited to have you with us, Emmett. Thanks everyone for the engagement with Ray in that first part and for your patience as we got through that first part of the forum. And I will pass it back over to Steve to once again just lay the format out and to start us off with our first question for Emmett.
All right. Thank you, Isaac. Thank you again, Ray. Thank you, Emmett. I think I pulled a shoulder, so I will take care of that in between, but I digress. Emmett, thank you so much for being here. Let me begin by asking you kind of the mirror version of the first question that I asked Ray. Ray's been the chairman of the party for 14 years. Obviously, there have been some great successes over that time. And as I mentioned, some recent disappointments. But whenever you're trying to replace an incumbent, in effect, you are asking you effectively fire the incumbent and hire the challenger. So as part of your opening statement, could you talk a little bit, not just about your candidacy, but that question some people will have about why should I make that change at this point? And why are you the person that provides the alternative while making that change?
Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Isaac, and Rights and Democracy, and all the grassroots champions for tuning in. I've been thinking about how, as we emerge from the most brutal aspects of this pandemic, I am so grateful to all of you who organized here in New Hampshire and across the state to end the havoc of the Trump presidency. But I'm also talking with folks across our state that recognize that our recovery is and needs to be local. I hear from folks that are worried about whether there will be enough ICU beds in their local hospital. Folks are worried about the vitality and revitalization of their small downtown businesses. They're worried and concerned about their public schools, the teachers that serve them, and whether their children will have an adequate and strong education to support them and support our next generation. And I could not think of a worse opportunity in this time where we have at the helm of our government a Republican majority that is so out of touch, not just with our values and our party, not just with the Republicans, but indeed the needs and the pains of all of our neighbors. We have seen this Republican majority has taken an attack on our unions at a time when we need to strengthen economic security for the working families of this state. They have targeted children's mental health services in this budget and targeted trans youth. They have tried to dismantle public education and attack reproductive health care access, and it is only February. And so what we need to do in this moment is recognize not only do we need to correct and fix getting Democrats and indeed folks that have our shared values in power. That is our job. We also need a strategy as a party that recognizes that if we can build power in our communities year after year and not just pivot from election cycle to election cycle, we can ensure that the pendulum never swings back again, in particular in a year when we are redrawing the maps of our districts. And one of the contrasts you will hear from my comments tonight or to this morning is that I believe that we do not need to decide between the top of the ticket and the bottom of the ticket. I believe that we can establish a strategy that if we recognize and see the power of all of our communities, no matter where they are on the trajectory of connecting their neighbors around shared democratic values, then that is how we build a resilient and sustainable party and have champions for our progressive values in every hall of government in this state, in local planning offices, and in Washington. And I also want to contrast the idea that I don't think the New Hampshire Democratic Party is just one of the many organizations and actors that is responsible for making sure that we are building a coalition of strong progressive voices and building capacity in all communities. I believe the New Hampshire Democratic Party, as the largest grassroots organization in the state, has the opportunity and responsibility to unify all of the voices and the leaders in this state. Whether we're speaking about our partners internal, like the Committee to Elect House Democrats and our candidates, our town committees, or incredible progressive organizations like Rights and Democracy or the Kent Street Coalition. When we speak what our message is and what we are fighting for and not just whom we are fighting against, all of our partners can unify around that vision, that message, to move forward in every community, to recognize that the power happens on the margins and in the small spaces and in the large cities of our state, that we lost this majority in communities that we didn't believe in or think were necessary to secure the top of the ticket, but will be our power to ensure that everyone in the Granite State has access to the values that we've been talking about, the policies, the initiatives, and the goals of leaving a better generation for our children. And so I'm going to talk to you today, and I hope through questions sharing why I think we do need a 10-year strategic plan, one that doesn't just start and stop at every election, because the relationships that we build in local communities don't just end after an election day. They start, they continue, and they are the seeds of power for our future. That means we are going to need a message as a party and not just put the message on the backs of our candidates. We are going to need to speak up for what we are fighting for and what we believe in, not just who we're fighting against. It means we're going to provide resources and toolkits to every town committee, every activist that needs it, because the strongest thing we have in this party is if someone in a community that may not have any Democratic representation stands up and says, I believe my community can be better off. I believe I can connect Democrats and folks around shared democratic values. That is an opportunity and potential. You know, when my folks were Democrats in the 1970s, just outside of Concord, that was a Republican community. And it was through their hard work, their belief that their local town and their community could be better off when they speak and share their values with their neighbors. And they worked to transform the state blue in so many cities. But our work is not over. I believe that we can come together with our partners like Rights and Democracy and others across this state when we speak and believe in that same boldness of my parents' generation to say it can happen everywhere. That is the strategy that we need to win. That is how we can raise the resources necessary to win. And it's how we can build a more resilient party and a future for the Granite State. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Emmett. I'm going to turn this on. There we go. A question that has come up frequently during this election deals with the difference in the experience in the practical level, on the building the structure. We talk about, you hear people talk about Stacey Abrams in Georgia and what she did and as well as others to create dynamic change last year in Georgia. But obviously there was an awful lot of infrastructure and practical grinded out work that was done to get to that point of success. And I know some folks want to inquire as to how you look at the nuts and bolts infrastructure of what the party would look like. Obviously, Ray has many years of experience and has touched on that in different ways. And so I think folks would like to compare how you look at the infrastructure now and going forward, what kind of changes you might propose, and so forth. So if you could walk us through a little bit that side of it, not so much at the high level, but at the very practical, on the ground, inside the party level.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Steve. You know, one of the things I think we can look to Stacey Abrams and her campaign manager, Lauren Growargo, as an exact template for how New Hampshire needs to proceed. She said that her state needed 10 years ago a 10-year strategic plan that doesn't just focus on a single election cycle and recognizes that a lot of folks in their communities can't just get engaged because of the candidates they're running against, but want to hear what the party's fighting for. She said specifically the path to victory comes in 4 components. She said we need to identify and be accountable for our weaknesses. We need to build infrastructure that works with partners outside of our party. We need to have a clear and compelling message for what we're fighting for that is simple, understandable, and galvanizes towns and counties. And we need to have a long-term plan. So when I look at the structure, I think our strength is in our town committees. And we need to recognize that there are many entities and organizations. There's the Committee to Elect House Democrats, the Senate Caucus, there's outside organizations. They are all working towards the same goal. But I think our town committees are our closest connection with what's happening on the ground. So we need to be able to build resources and establish local goals for them. I think we can't have a placeholder model where we tell town chairs that are in Republican districts that they just need to find someone to put on the ballot that they tell will not win, that they won't provide resources for, because then it's unsurprising that those folks then don't win their election. And it's even less surprising that they often leave the party feeling unsupported. We instead, through the county committees and the town committees, have a structure of establishing local goals that reach every community where they're at. So maybe in a community like Alton or Salem that doesn't have Democratic representation in the State House, we can say, why don't this year we knock 1,000 doors in your community around a local issue, whether it's a public school that's being threatened with accreditation loss, or it's a local landfill that neighbors are concerned about its expansion. And then the next year we knock another 1,000 doors. And over the course of a couple of years, having knocked 1,000 more doors and engaged neighbors around our values and our message, I think people will buy into that, whether Democratic, Independent, Republican, or not yet registered to vote. And we'll identify folks that then say, I want to be part of what this party is doing locally and the state level, and I will run for office. And they will draw on their resources within the community to win. I think our strength lies in providing resources, fundraising capacity, toolkits to recognize that we are operating in a new landscape to engage in a digital space and with new generations. And we cannot put that all on the backs of volunteer, independent town committees or town chairs. We have an opportunity as leadership to provide the resources and connect and foster relationships between and amongst town committees so that they themselves have the best practices to raise the money that they need to win, to have access to the voter file so that they can build and grow relationships with their neighbors, and that they can help run candidates in new ways and recruit people to do so. That's where our strength lies. That's where I'm going to focus and build more capacity. And I think whether you're concerned about the State House majority or Senator Hassan's reelection campaign, it's all going to happen with everyone that is activated and inspired at the local level.
Emma, quick follow-up off of a question that was asked from the audience during Ray's portion. You mentioned town chairs multiple times in that answer. So would you support an effort by town chairs to amend the party's constitution to allow town chairs to be voting members of the state committee? Yes or no? And briefly, your thought process to that answer.
100%, absolutely. I don't think we need to investigate whether this is a worthy cause. Our town chairs are the volunteers that carry the weight of our parties before, during, and after elections. We are the Democratic Party. It seems more democratic to be enfranchising people that have been supporting us as volunteers. But there's a second reason that we need to do this, because if we're going to build capacity in our town committees, we need to recognize that town chairs are largely thankless positions where people really do carry a lot of weight, have to, build massive, local campaign operations, sometimes with little expertise or little resources. If we can give town chairs a little bit more power in a sense of connection to Concord, connection to our state committee, then that will ignite energy within town committees to say, oh, I do want to be a town chair. I do want to participate and be active and be seen as engaged in my community. And it will also require that our state committee and our leadership is responsible, accountable to and listening to our towns, because at least every 2 years, they're going to need to cultivate relationships and attract those votes. I think the town chair's amendment is one of the ways that we can structurally make sure that our party is speaking to and engaging with all of its communities, no matter what part of the state they're in.
Okay, I appreciate that. Let me move along here. We have a number of folks, some of whom will be familiar if you watched the first portion of this program. Laura Lynch. Laura, you were on earlier today. You were a candidate in 2020. You've been an activist. You're part of the RAD Leadership Committee. You have a question that you wanted to fire away at to Emmett.
Yes, I do. I also want to thank Emmett and Ray for doing this forum. When they were asked to do it a month or so ago, they both volunteered to be here without a hesitation, and thank you for that. My experience as a candidate who ran for state house in a tough district last year, similar to what I heard from many progressives and local party activists since last year's election, is that there was drastic underinvestment in support for local candidates from the party. While Biden beat Trump by tens of thousands of votes than Clinton did, and our federal candidates won their elections, Democrats lost their majorities here in New Hampshire in the state House, the state Senate, and Executive Council to the Republican Party. Emmett, how would you ensure that local races are no longer deprioritized so that we can finally win and maintain progressive power on the local and state level in New Hampshire? And how would you balance that with the importance of New Hampshire's federal races?
Thank you, Laura, and thank you for stepping up to run. This speaks at the heart of, I think, what my plan is trying to put forward, that I really believe at the end of the day, it is the Democratic Party of New Hampshire that is responsible and accountable to the losses that happened this last cycle, and will be responsible for building and growing our Republican or our Democratic majority in the state house. I don't think the average Granite Stater appreciates the difference between the Committee to Elect House Democrats, the NHDP, or all these other organizations. But I think it is our opportunity as the Democratic Party to establish a message, because that message will ultimately help anyone that is running for office as a Democrat. I've described it as our party too often fishes when it needs to be farming. This last cycle, when all of you were running for state rep or state Senate races, the line was cast into the river. That line was Chris Sununu is a Trump guy through and through. And it turns out that line wasn't enough to capture enough votes. And indeed, if we were listening to communities outside of Concord, we could have been told by so many folks, our residents, our neighbors need to hear something positive. They need the party to be speaking to what we are fighting for, how we are supporting them when they're opening bills on the dinner table or concerned about their kids' local public schools. And so when we invest in a message of our party, then individual candidates don't need to step up and say, I'm the legalized cannabis candidate, or I'm the reproductive justice candidate. You will benefit from having everyone in your community knowing, hearing, and seeing what Democrats are fighting for. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel to do this. We have a platform. That platform included things like legalizing cannabis and ending the war on drugs in New Hampshire. It includes things like fighting for environmental health protections and a better, cleaner future for our children. But that platform largely sat on the shelf collecting dust when it could have been put to use before an election so that any candidate or indeed any organization could see what we're fighting for and choose to build momentum with us. And I have to say, I think as chair, one of the roles that is enshrined in this position is you choose who is on the platform committee. So I don't believe it is the chair's duty to take a hands-off approach to the platform when we select the individuals that are going to decide what does the New Hampshire Democratic Party stand for. And what I recognize when appointing or reappointing the platform committee for the New Hampshire Democratic Party, I will make sure that everyone on there knows this platform is going to be used. It is going to be put into practice. We are going to pick up the mantle, the megaphone, the microphone, the state media, and be speaking to what we believe in so that all people in the state, whether they are Republican, Independent, Democratic, or not yet registered to vote, can see it and say, I want to be part of this too. I think that will support and serve your races, and I think it will support every race in a way that we can accomplish it for 400 candidates for State House all the way on up.
All right.
Thank you, Emmett.
Thank you. Thank you, Emmett. Ed Taylor, you had a question earlier for Ray. I believe I have a similar question now that relates to the future of the presidential primary, among other things, in New Hampshire. Ed, could you give your question, please?
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Hey, my name is Ed Taylor. I use he, him, his. My question's the same that I posed to Ray. Keeping the New Hampshire primary has historically been a critical role for the party chair, but there is an inherent issue with New Hampshire, a 90% white state, holding this position a Democratic coalition whose center is increasingly people of color. How do you circle that square?
It's a great question, Ed. Thank you. I think the first thing is we can't dismiss this argument. We can't just say that it's on other states to resolve it. I think we need to recognize that it is very credible because it is true. The experiences of people and communities of color actually contribute to a lived experience that reflects and matters for our presidential politics. And so we need to be able to articulate how New Hampshire's future can really speak to that. One of the things that I think is crucial is that we do a better job of telling the stories of New Hampshire's diversity. First, I hope to see in the 2020 census what many of us in communities feel is that our communities are becoming more diverse, our cities and towns are becoming more diverse, and that means speaking to those stories. Here in my hometown of Somersworth in New Hampshire, we have the largest Indonesian population in New England. That's a story that we can now tell to DNC folks and others that are determining the presidential primary calendar and say, there are new stories of folks of color, folks for whom English isn't their first language, folks from different lived experiences that are now making New Hampshire home. And that's a story that's important to folks that want to be our future president. But we also have work to do as a party to make sure that our party is connected to the voices and the communities of color. One of the incredible things about Manchester is that it's one of our most diverse cities in this state. And that should be contributing to how our party sees and hears and understands the lived experiences of people of color. But although New Hampshire is 76% white, all of the state committee members for Manchester, for the New Hampshire Democratic Party, over 90% of them are white, which means that our leadership and our party isn't even drawing on the strength of those in these communities. And it means that we can't just practice diversity and inclusion 6 weeks before an election when we feel like that this is something we need to address. It means that our organizing needs to take place in Black-owned businesses or in Indonesian churches, or that our literature is also in Spanish and other languages. It means that we need to recognize what counts as participating in our party may look like different things for different communities, but it's our opportunity as leadership to help build and grow those relationships for town committees and local organizers and elected leaders so they feel that they're embedded in the process year round. I think that's the best defense for why New Hampshire's small hands-on retail politics can and should still go first, but meets and matches the need to reflect the diversity that is so important to our politics.
All right, thank you for that. I know that is a hot and very topical question these days. I want to go to Dana Hackett, who asked a question earlier as well, from Laconia, co-founder of the Lakes Region RAD chapter. Dana, your question, please.
Thank you. So my question for Mr. Soldati. The Democratic Party has a branding issue here and around the country in rural communities. New Hampshire has swung back and forth between Republican and Democratic wins for decades, and several small town and rural communities have been trending red in recent years. Why have so many people in the rural working class turned away from the Democratic Party? And what would be your strategy to reverse the rightward trend in rural New Hampshire? Thank you.
Great question, Dana. And I think the issue really does, you use the term branding, and I think that's right. And I sort of speak it as messaging too. I think that we have a credibility gap that, again, if we just expect our gubernatorial candidates or our senatorial candidates will define what we stand for, that leaves a lot of gaps. And what that means is it gives the Republicans an opportunity to define what we stand for. Every 2 years, I see a gubernatorial, campaigns for Democrat in this state. And at least in the last 6 years, it just really was a proxy for the Granite State Advantage and the pledge and the income tax. And our best strategy as Democrats was one of non-engagement, to just hope that the Republicans didn't invest in that strategy. And unfortunately, we learned the consequences of that strategy of non-engagement in this last election. So I think that when we put out a message of what we stand for, and again, it doesn't need to be 200 talking points. It can be looking at the 2 to 3 things that we know already galvanize most folks in this state, whether urban or rural, whether they come from wealthy families or they are struggling to make ends meet. We can see as Democrats what is needed to support most Granite Staters, but it doesn't help if our platform sits on the shelf collecting dust. And I also have to say, I do agree with Chairman Buckley that the trust factor is supremely important. But we need to talk not just about the trust of building community and neighborhood conversations. We need to talk about the trust that folks do or do not have with our party. We need to talk about the trust that town committees do or do not have with our party. One of the things I'm advocating for as chair is we need to give every town committee open access to VAN, open access to the voter file, the same level that field organizers would have an election, so that town committees can do the work of building these neighborhood conversations, can be connecting and fostering relationships, so that the folks that you're worried about are leaving our party, our town committees are best equipped to engage them and keep them involved, keep listening to them and keep speaking to them. But if we withhold those tools, if we don't allow them to even export phone banks or export canvas lists, then we aren't using our best asset, which is the folks on the town level that see and have the conversations that you are having that will strengthen our party and will increase our membership.
All right. Thank you, Emmett. Thank you, Dana. Sebastian, thank you for presenting us up north. You have a question for Emmett that deals with where the goalposts are in our politics and where the Democratic Party should be within that.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Once again here, I asked this question earlier to Chairman Buckley, Emmett. Democratic leaders have failed to reject the right-wing racist scapegoating and exclusion of immigrants. You know I see some people in the chat commenting about Senator Hassan's work towards immigrants, and I do understand that. But at the same time, I want to point out some of the flaws, which is excluding undocumented immigrants from the coronavirus relief package. So over the past few decades, many Democratic Party leaders have similarly failed to fully reject the right-wing's racist dog whistle politics, opting to be more of a Republican light. Many public opinion show that the majority of Americans, they oppose excluding immigrants. They support universal health care, increases the minimum wage all around the country, and bold climate legislation. New Hampshire is a swing state with some deeply entrenched anti-immigrant and anti-tax regulation narratives. So, Emmett, here's my question for you. Senator Hassan won her race by a razor-thin margin in 2016. What is your case for how advancing a bold vision will make a candidate like Senator Hassan stronger and more likely to win rather than be more vulnerable?
Thank you, Sebastian. I really believe that when we are talking about local first, we are not saying that we only want local elections to be won Democratic. What we are recognizing is the local context is indeed where Senator Hassan won in that margin. The 1,500 some odd votes were in communities that had Democratic representation that now have Republican representation in our state house. They now have the microphone. They're now speaking the message. So we do need to recognize and tap into the potential that we need to inspire people at the local level to be involved, because they will be the ones to activate and support Senator Hassan's re-election campaign. And I really believe that you can't put a price tag on inspiration. When people feel seen and included, they then want to talk to their friends. They want to engage people. But that the expectation really needs to start from leadership to say, we believe if communities and town committees feel well resourced, they feel supported, that we are addressing their needs and listening to them, listening to the issues that are resonating, that's going to help Senator Hassan's re-election. Now, I certainly agree with Chairman Buckley that it is not the role of our party chair to direct candidates how to vote, but it is our responsibility to be connecting candidates and elected leaders with their communities, to be making sure that they see, hear, and understand how their votes are being heard and how those votes will or will not help support their re-election campaigns or support them in office. It is our opportunity to step and have an affirmative, positive message of what we mean and the communities that we want to lift up, so that when they do go to take a vote or do go to ask for your vote, they are well connected to what New Hampshire Democrats and New Hampshire residents in general need. I think our party has a big opportunity to pick up the mantle and not just say, well, we don't engage. We don't need to tell Senator Hassan what to do. We don't need to tell any state rep candidate what to do, but we can connect them with the opportunities in the state, which are the folks in the towns that are ultimately going to be the ones holding the totems outside on election day. They're going to be the ones writing the letters to the editor. But if they don't feel included in the process year round, then they may not be the ones bringing friends and neighbors in along with them to make them feel welcome. I think when we have a positive and affirmative message, I think when we are engaging our congressional and senatorial delegation in Washington and connect them with those voices, whether, to your point, of the undocumented or voices from various constituencies and communities, they will be better off, and all of our state will be better organized to support those campaigns.
Emmett, among some of the things you mentioned there were different communities that we as Democrats need to be able to connect with and make feel welcome. Elena, a person who asked a question earlier, she's a recent UNH grad, she's a Red member, and I failed to mention that she's the media director for the mighty Laconia Democrats, who are rocking and rolling, and I appreciate Alana's role in that. Alana, you had a question along the lines of how we reach out to an even broader collection of New Hampshireites. Would you like to ask a question to Emmett?
Definitely. Thank you, Emmett, for being here. As was previously stated in our section with Chairman Buckley, elevating voices is critically important in our path forward as New Hampshire Democrats, which you just touched upon as well. So to that end, how would you work to make the party more inclusive to underrepresented groups? Specifically, how would you elevate the voices of the BIPOC community, folks with disabilities, lower income folks, and again, young people like me? And what is your plan to develop a more young and diverse talent within our party's volunteer structure? Thank you.
Thank you, Alana, for that question. First, I think it's important that we don't just, when our party leadership decides to be inclusive and engaged, that we actually understand the different needs and lived experiences of these different constituencies. And while I think the caucus system is a start to it, it's important that we have the Young Dems caucus, the LGBTQ caucus, the AAPI, the AA caucus. I think we need to do more to help connect our town committees with those communities locally, so that they aren't just drawing on one or two people for the same issues again and again, but are actually building strength, capacity, and relationships in their local communities. I talked about, my personal experience or my local experience in Somersworth means, how does the Somersworth Democratic Committee engage with and connect with Indonesian business owners and church leaders year round? We need to recognize that those stories and relationships and communities are very different in our rural spaces and in our cities, and we need to give them the resources and the connections to do that. So there isn't just one, two, or three spokespeople for these caucuses. You also talk about young people, which I think is crucial, because as I've looked out across and met with over 40 town committees in this process for chair, and have met with others through my executive council campaign this summer, many of the folks have remarked to me that they are concerned that the vast majority of town committees are made up of folks of my parents' generation. And they have asked me, Emmett, where are the folks in their 30s and 40s with young children that aren't finding the time to get to these meetings? Where are the folks in their 20s returning back to New Hampshire from college or service abroad that don't see their values as our values? Where are the 17-year-olds that are setting up environmental clubs in their local high school, not recognizing that right across the street, there's a Democratic town committee that is also fighting for the environmental health of their community? It's our opportunity at leadership to make sure to be fostering and building these relationships, because I think our strength is in having a multiracial, multi-ethnic, and multi-generational party. And we need to be putting those bonds into practice through internships and mentorships. It's one of the reasons I talked about having a full-time year-round youth organizer, because I don't think it's enough to show up 6 weeks before an election looking for young people to energize town committees. We need to be building those relationships year in and year out, to be seen in the spaces and places that younger generations and other communities and constituencies are engaging in. And it also means that we need to hire locally. We need to utilize our county committees and all of the institutional knowledge and community connections to help inform our hiring practices so that folks can draw on local talent for field organizers or other staff that can inform them about who are the best places to engage during an election, who are the people that we need to connect with, maybe that aren't even inside our party. That local knowledge needs to be shared through our party. Too often I've seen examples where an individual that runs a town committee might do so and build it up and have a lot of charisma. But if that person leaves or moves on, they might not pass on that institutional knowledge. And then our party loses that institutional knowledge. At the outset, Steve had asked me about the structure of our party. I think we need to make sure we are building a structure that keeps us connected to every aspect, every community, every constituency in the big cities and the rural spaces that we can draw on year after year to continue to foster community. At the end of the day, although the banner and mission of the Democratic Party is to elect Democrats in New Hampshire, I think there's really a subheadline that says we need to connect our neighbors and foster and grow communities. Because I believe that when we do that, that is the best defense against misinformation from Republicans. It's the best way of supporting our electoral wins for your local planning board or the state house. I truly believe that when folks come together around shared democratic values, then they will support our policies, our messages and ideas, but we aren't doing enough work to build that with the constituencies that we need to hear from and that we need to build trust with.
Okay, Emmett, I'm sure I want to keep it pretty equal. There is one question that I want to take this prerogative as a moderator that has come up in many conversations that I've had with people, including the members of the state committee, who remain undecided. So I think it's an important question to bring up, particularly as the challenger in this dynamic. One of the current chair's perceived strength is fundraising. And so there have been a lot of questions that have kind of a two-pronged element to it. One is, can you talk about how you see, tell us how people should have confidence that you would be able, as chair, to raise certainly sufficient, if not similar or more amounts of money than we have been. It certainly has been much more than the Republicans have been raising over the last several cycles. And the second part is, what do you see as the role in terms of fundraising that makes it at the state house level, even in districts that maybe are ruby red, and that a lot of folks feel like you have to kind of decide whether to fish or cut bait in parts of the state that are traditionally very difficult for Democrats to win in down ballot races. So it's a broad fundraising question. I know it's on the mind of many people who are undecided about this chairman's race.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve, for the question. The resources and raising the resources we need to be successful in every aspect of the ballot is crucial. Of course, many of you have acknowledged that resource allocation is a big issue as well, and we need to make sure that we are being effective in allocating the resources. But of course, as I am entering in as I would be entering into this position, we need to speak to how we can create a sustainable revenue stream for this party. Currently, we have largely unsustainable revenue. After every presidential cycle, we lose 75% of our large donors. The vast majority of our money raised in-state is off the backs of our candidates. We sell them the voter file at exorbitant prices, many whom choose not to purchase it and look elsewhere. One of the things I have called for is that our party needs to have a full-time finance director. The purpose of a finance director is not just to make all the calls to donors, it is to establish a strategy that architects a long-term sustainable revenue plan that includes doing donor outreach. It includes recognizing that there are people within New Hampshire that do want to see changes in their local community, do believe in our values, but that if we're not calling them, if we're not forming those relationships or getting them to invest in the kind of future that we want to live in, then they're not going to contribute and it's not going to be sustainable. So I would hire and have a full-time finance director and believe that that person could architect a statewide digitally savvy donor program that includes the $10 a month or $20 a month grassroots donations. Because if we are going to have a strategic plan that builds capacity year after year and doesn't just raise money off of who's on the top of the ticket, then we need to have a fundraising strategy that matches that sustainability so that we are cultivating donors and folks that do see our values. That also means that in conjunction with the finance director, I as chair could be working with county committee to build capacity locally. You know, the Hampton Democrats, small town on the seacoast, raised $33,000 last year. That wasn't at the direction of the NHDP. It was because they recognized they needed the resources to advertise on social media to be able to get their state reps reelected. And they developed their own local plan in order to do that. We need to recognize that there are experts and there are skilled and qualified folks to be supporting fundraising throughout the state, but our finance director would help us work with a vast network of volunteers to be cultivating those resources. I think it is important that we also recognize that how we spend dollars matters. I was proud and grateful when I ran in my executive council race and I raised as much money as my predecessor, Andrew Valinsky, that we had the highest vote per dollar turnout. It means that the way in which we were campaigning, the way in which we were deploying those dollars and resources really got and garnered the most votes and participation on the ballot. And I think with a finance director, our leadership and in working with CHED and forming strong relationships with the Senate caucus, we can articulate ways of how best to run campaigns in the 21st century. Because as we emerge from COVID, we are going to be playing in a different landscape and a different world. And we need leadership that is ready to raise and retain sustainable resources and also deploy them effectively so we can be competitive in far more districts than we are now.
Okay, thank you, Emmett, for that. That's an important question. We have time for, I believe, one more audience question. Pat Martin is with us. Pat is a force of nature in southwestern New Hampshire. We're really happy to have her here today as part of the program. So Pat, I believe you have a question for Emmett. I'd love to give you the opportunity to ask that now.
Oh, thank you very much, Steve. Emmett, I've been very disappointed that in the last 6 years, I've been asking the NHDP to produce literature talking about the climate crisis. And I feel like it's a winning issue that, it's one of the real weak points with Sununu and all the reps. What will you do and it's been denied. I mean, I've never seen that literature printed. Yeah, it's in the platform, but there's no push for it. And in fact, I've been snickered at for emphasizing it. So what would you do to make the climate crisis front and center?
Exactly. I would push for it because you're right. It is in our platform. And if it's in our platform, that means as chair of the party, it is my mandate to make sure that folks in this state, not just Democrats or town committees, know that that's what we're fighting for. And you are right to point out that in particular, addressing the climate crisis and indeed getting PFAS polluters out of our rivers and streams is something that is already popular with Granite Staters. This isn't an issue of us needing to convince the Granite State. It's an issue of us needing to convince leadership that this is the message that Granite Staters need to hear and that it will help us win in the voting booth. And so, as I have said before, I am fully committed to ensuring that our platform committee, whether it includes fighting the climate crisis or legalizing cannabis, two things I might add that you point out, that is a weak point for Chris Sununu. It is a decision he made that was particularly unpopular, and yet our party was nowhere to be seen when it became the time to be speaking to it, and we pushed our candidates to do it instead. You know, I always say, if you give an individual candidate fighting for the climate crisis $10, they will go out and articulate their message. They'll form relationships, they'll speak to that message, and they'll also have to deal with the onslaught of opposition. If you give $10 to your party and they promise to speak to the climate crisis, it's as if you've given every candidate $10 because everyone is seeing and hearing what Democrats are fighting for, and town committees and local candidates on the doors of their neighbors, they can make it local. They can speak to how the climate crisis affects them or affects their community. But if you're not hearing it from our party, then they're not necessarily trusting the Democrats are fighting for it too. Too many people went into the voting booth this last election and they voted for Joe Biden, Chris Sununu, and Senator Shaheen. Many of them also supported their congressperson, and then they just left. Because when they didn't know the person's name, there wasn't enough credibility in what the Democratic Party was going to be fighting for in their community and their state that they continued to support people on that ticket. We have the mantle as the party to ensure that when you run for office as a Democrat, you know that we are promising you we are going to be supporting the things that we claim that are our values. I agree. Someone had asked the question earlier about not sacrificing our values. And of course, we're not sacrificing our values, but we're not speaking about them enough either. We need to be talking about the issues that we know are affecting the lives of folks all across this state. And I think you are right to point out, Pat, that the climate crisis and some of the other issues we've talked about, like public education, already show us where the energy is in this state. And it's our party's opportunity and responsibility to pick up the microphone.
Thank you, Emmett.
All right. Thank you, Emmett. Isaac, that is it in terms of our time with Emmett. Hopefully, we tried to keep it very equal and appreciate people's patience as we went over. But obviously, I could see that folks stuck around for it. So that's a good thing. Thank you, Emmett. So Isaac, I believe at that point, we're back to you.
Thank you, Steve. I want to once again thank Emmett and thank Ray for joining us today and for taking time out of a Saturday to answer our questions. Thank you again to our members who spoke, Alana, Sebastian, Ed, Dana. Thank you, Steve, for moderating. I want to implore everyone on here and Laura, did I say Laura? Laura, this was actually Laura's idea in the first place, Laura Lynch, to do this forum. So send her some congratulations and some thanks for helping us pull off one of the biggest events we've actually held this past year. We need your support to continue to do this important work. We need independent political power that's going to push for a true progressive agenda in our state, and that's going to do year-round organizing. That's what Rights and Democracy exists for. So if you are already a monthly sustainer, you should sign up to bump it up $5 a month. If you are not, you should sign up right now. There's a link that I'm posting in the chat here for making a donation. Please sign up. This is how we can continue to do this critical work of organizing around the issues that impact our communities, our loved ones, our future generations, our living ecosystem. We need your help to continue to do this work, to fight for policy change, to train and develop candidates and grassroots leaders, to push for change at the state level and the national level. So sign up as a member if you are not already. There's a couple key actions I want to encourage everyone to take while I have you here, while I have the 260 plus of you here. It's amazing. There's a couple core issues that we're focusing on. Housing justice is one. We have a click to email action tool that I'm going to post in the chat right here to send an email to Chris Sununu demanding that he use more federal funds to address the houseless crisis in New Hampshire. We all know how big of an issue housing is here in the state, and folks who are houseless right now in the winter and at all times of the year need more support from our state, and Sununu needs to step up. So use that tool to send Chris Sununu an email. We also really need our federal delegation to step up more publicly on the Raise the Wage Act. I am so excited about the possibility we have right now of passing a $15 minimum wage on the national level. None of our federal delegation have co-sponsored that bill. We need them to step up unapologetically. We need them to co-sponsor the bill. We need to know that they're going to stand behind it and pass the bill as it is. Things are looking good there, but we need our federal delegation to step up. So use this tool to also send an email to your senators and Congress members, call them and leave them a voicemail. If you are free at 3 o'clock on Monday, we will be doing office visits to both our senators to just with small groups of people be outside with signs and delivering petitions to those senators as part of a national day of action with the Poor People's Campaign and with the Service Employees International Union. There's people doing this all across the country. If you want to join in on that, we will send a follow-up email with all that information. Last thing I will say, there is some really amazing resolutions in the Congress right now. The one that I'm very excited about, that we should all be excited about, is called the Thrive Agenda. This is basically the Green New Deal in its newest iteration. Thrive is an acronym. It stands for Transform, Heal, and Renew by investing in vibrant economies. There is an action here for everyone to send emails to the Biden administration demanding that he adopt the Thrive Resolution, aka the Green New Deal, as his climate plan, encourage the Biden administration to adopt the boldest climate plan possible. They will only do it if they know that there is a massive public movement and mandate for it. So please help show that. Thank you all so much for being here. Once again, if you're not a Rights and Democracy member, sign up. It's www.radnh.org/support. Take those actions that you see in the Zoom chat here. We will send a follow-up email with all that information, and we will make sure to get any questions that weren't able to be addressed directly to the candidates. Thank you again so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you to our moderator, to the candidates, and all the folks who asked questions. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was really fantastic. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Doris.
Onward and upward.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
Isaac.